Chapter 1, The Night That Ends Everything. Carl Briggs arrived early to his own engagement party because that was the kind of man he was. Not early in the nervous, pacing sense. Early in the practical sense. He unlocked the side door of the venue, nodded to the caterer he'd already met twice, and set his jacket carefully over the back of a chair so it wouldn't wrinkle. He checked the place cards even though he'd checked them that morning. He adjusted the framed photo near the entrance. Him and Mandy on a windy beach, her laughing mid-sentence. Him squinting into the sun like the moment might be too bright to fully process. Everything was in place. The room smelled faintly of citrus polish and fresh flowers. Soft music played, something instrumental and neutral enough not to offend anyone's tastes. Carl exhaled, slow and steady, and allowed himself a small, private smile. This was good. This was right. For nearly 5 years, Mandy Towns had been the constant in his life. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just present. She'd laughed louder than he did, talked faster, pushed him gently into things he might have avoided on his own. When he'd proposed 3 months earlier, she'd cried immediately, startling him. He'd thought then that this must be what certainty felt like. People began to arrive. Carl shook hands, accepted hugs, answered congratulations with polite warmth. His parents arrived first, his mother smoothing his sleeve, his father clapping him on the shoulder. Friends followed, co-workers, Mandy's aunt with the sharp eyeliner and louder opinions. The room filled with noise and movement and expectation. An hour passed. Carl checked his phone without making it obvious. No new messages. Someone asked where Mandy was. Probably running a few minutes late, he said easily. Traffic. That explanation worked for a while. Then it didn't. By the time the cake arrived and Mandy still hadn't, the lie had begun to wilt. Carl felt it in the way people glanced at the door too often, in the sympathetic smiles that came a second too late. He stepped into the hallway, dialed her number, and waited. She answered on the third ring. Hey! Mandy's voice was bright, breathless. Laughter bubbled behind her, the clink of silverware unmistakable. Hey, Carl said. His voice came out level, which surprised him. Everything okay? Yeah. We just sat down, actually. Where are you? He asked. Oh, she paused, like she was deciding whether the detail mattered. I'm out with the team. Dinner ran long. Carl closed his eyes. You're at dinner, he said. I should be home in a few hours. A few hours. Not rushing. Not apologizing. Not remembering. There were things Carl could have said then. He could have reminded her of the date circled on the calendar in blue ink. Of the invitations. Of the people standing in a room waiting to celebrate the future she'd agreed to build with him. Instead, he heard himself say, Okay, have fun. You too, Mandy replied automatically, already distracted. The line went dead. Carl stood there for a moment longer, phone still at his ear, then lowered it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He straightened his shoulders and walked back into the room. Everyone looked at him. It wasn't dramatic, the realization. It didn't hit him like heartbreak was supposed to. It settled instead, heavy, undeniable. He saw himself years from now, explaining away missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, promises deferred until some imaginary future where things slowed down. He saw divorce papers on a kitchen counter. He saw himself shrinking. Carl stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tap a glass. He simply waited until the room noticed him, and when it did, he smiled. Thank you all for coming, he said. I really appreciate it. A hush fell. I'm sorry to say that tonight isn't going to continue as planned. Mandy won't be joining us, and I won't be asking her to marry me. Gasps, murmurs, his mother's sharp inhale. This isn't anyone's fault here, Carl continued calmly. But it wouldn't be fair to celebrate something that isn't right anymore. Thank you for understanding. He didn't wait for questions. Carl retrieved his jacket, nodded once more to the caterer, and walked out. The drive home was quiet. He didn't turn on the radio. His hands were steady on the wheel. The house was dark when he arrived. Familiar. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't consider leaving. When Mandy came home hours later, furious and incredulous, Carl listened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself beyond the truth. I don't want to marry someone who forgets me, he said simply. By the time she left, slamming the door behind her, Carl felt something unexpected beneath the sadness. Relief. The future had collapsed, but for the first time in months it was his again. Chapter 2, The morning after the future, Carl woke to silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that rang in your ears, but a clean, open quiet, like the house had taken a deep breath and was waiting to see what he would do next. Sunlight slipped through the blinds in narrow bands, landing across the foot of the bed. Carl lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, taking inventory. No alarm blaring. No phone vibrating on the nightstand with Mandy's name attached to some half-urgent work crisis. No sense of dread about a conversation he'd been putting off. Just mourning. He sat up slowly, bracing for regret. It didn't come. There was sadness, yes, a dull ache behind the ribs, but it felt honest, proportional. Not the sharp panic he'd been living with for months. Carl swung his legs out of bed and padded into the kitchen. The coffee maker sat where it always had, smug and dependable. He filled it with water, measured the grounds carefully out of habit, then paused. He dumped in a little extra. Rebel, he muttered to himself. The phone buzzed while the coffee brewed. He glanced at the screen. 23 notifications. Missed calls. Texts stacked like unread mail. He didn't open them yet. He poured his coffee, took a sip, and leaned against the counter. The house was his. That thought landed differently now, not as a legal fact but as a felt truth. His house, his space, his mess if he wanted one. The phone buzzed again. This time, Mandy's name filled the screen. He let it ring out. Carl wasn't avoiding her. He just wasn't ready to let her voice crash into the fragile calm he'd woken up with. There would be time for confrontation. He had no intention of disappearing or pretending nothing had happened. But first, he needed to understand how he felt. He scrolled through the texts instead. What the hell happened last night? Are you okay? Your mother is worried. Call me ASAP. Carl replied to his parents first. I'm okay. I'll come by later. Then he texted his closest friend. Nate. I'm alive. Coffee in hand. The response came immediately. Thank God. I was about to drive over with a crowbar and emotional support donuts. Carl smiled despite himself. He was halfway through his second cup when the front door opened. Mandy didn't knock. She stormed in, heels clicking too loudly on the hardwood. Her coat still on, hair pulled back tight like armor. Her eyes found him instantly. What the hell was that? She demanded. Carl didn't flinch. He set his mug down carefully, turned, and faced her. Good morning, he said. Don't, Mandy snapped. Do not good morning me. You humiliated me. Carl folded his arms loosely. You weren't there. That doesn't matter, she shot back. You don't cancel an engagement in front of everyone without talking to me. I tried talking to you, he said calmly. You were at dinner. Her mouth opened, then closed. That was work. That was our engagement party. Silence stretched between them. Mandy scoffed, pacing a tight circle like the floor itself had offended her. You're overreacting, she said finally. I got busy. It happens. It happens, Carl repeated. That's the problem. She turned on him. So what? You make one dramatic gesture and suddenly 5 years mean nothing. Carl shook his head. It wasn't one night. Then what was it? She challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you blindsided me. Carl considered that. From where I'm standing, you forgot me. That's not fair. It's accurate, he said quietly. You forgot the date. You forgot to check in. You didn't even sound surprised when I called. Mandy crossed her arms. I have responsibilities now. So do I. You don't understand what this job takes. You're right, Carl said. I don't. And you never tried to help me. That landed. Mandy's expression shifted, not to guilt, but irritation. I shouldn't have to explain myself all the time. I shouldn't have to compete with your calendar, Carl replied. She laughed sharply. So that's it? You're throwing everything away because I'm ambitious. No, he said. I'm stepping away because I don't feel like your partner anymore. They stared at each other, the truth finally sitting between them without pretense. Mandy exhaled, frustrated. You're making a mistake, she said. Maybe, Carl agreed, but it's mine. She shook her head, incredulous. Where am I supposed to go? You can stay with your sister, he said. I'll help you pack. Her eyes widened. You already planned this. I planned honesty, Carl said. The rest is just logistics. Mandy opened her mouth to argue again, then stopped. She looked around the kitchen, the house, the life she'd been half living in for months. This is unbelievable, she muttered. She went to the bedroom and slammed the door. Carl sat down at the table and waited. Packing took less time than he expected. Mandy moved quickly, efficiently, like she was late for something else. She didn't cry. Neither did he. At the door, she hesitated. You're really okay with this? She asked. No, Carl said. But I will be. She searched his face for something. Doubt, maybe, or desperation. She didn't find it. Good luck, Carl, she said stiffly. You too, he replied. When the door closed behind her, the house went quiet again. Carl let himself sit with it. Later that afternoon, he drove to his parents' house, fielded concern and hugs and carefully worded questions. He didn't defend Mandy. He didn't vilify her either. He told the truth and left it at that. By evening, exhaustion caught up with him. Emotional fatigue was heavier than he'd expected, like gravity had been turned up slightly. He stopped at his favorite takeout place on the way home. The cashier squinted at him. No usual? She asked. Carl blinked. Just realized I don't have one anymore. She laughed. Rough day. You could say that. He ate alone at his kitchen table, scrolling through messages he didn't answer yet. And for the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a narrowing hallway. It felt like open space. Carl leaned back in his chair, let out a slow breath, and thought, not for the first time that day, that maybe ending something wasn't the same as losing it. Sometimes it was how you made room for what came next. Chapter 3, Relearning Space. By the third day alone in the house, Carl discovered two things. First, silence was not a void. It was a medium. It carried thoughts the way water carried sound, softly, sometimes deceptively far. Second, he had absolutely no idea how many wedding-related contracts he'd signed. He stood in the living room with a legal pad balanced against his arm, staring at a neat stack of folders he'd pulled from the hall cabinet. Each one bore some variation of Autumn Bliss, Forever Begins, or his personal favorite, Happily Ever After events. Hubris, Carl muttered. He sat, flipped open the first folder, and began making calls. The florist was sympathetic in a distant, professional way. The photographer was less so but ultimately pragmatic. The DJ tried to upsell him on a birthday package before realizing how badly he'd misread the tone. By early afternoon, Carl's voice had gone flat and tired. He saved the final folder for last, mostly because it was thicker than the rest and faintly glittery. Happily Ever After events. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Happily Ever After. This is Evelyn. Her voice was calm, lightly amused, like she'd already anticipated the worst and found it manageable. Hi, Carl said. I'm calling to cancel an event. There was a pause, the faint sound of typing. Okay, may I have the date? October 18th. Another pause. Longer this time. Ah, Evelyn said gently. Engagement party turned wedding? No, Carl said. Just everything. Got it, she replied without missing a beat. Let me pull up your file. More typing. Carl leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the now bare spot on the wall where they'd once pinned color swatches and seating charts. The indentation from the corkboard was still there, faint but stubborn. I see it, Evelyn said. Carl Briggs. That's me. Before I say anything official, she added, do you want the efficient version or the compassionate one? Carl blinked. There are versions? Always. He huffed out a quiet laugh before he could stop himself. Efficient. Please. Okay. Per your contract, you're within the partial refund window. You'll get 60% back. No penalties. I'll email confirmation today. That's better than I expected, Carl admitted. People usually say that, Evelyn replied. Is there anything else I can help you with? Carl hesitated. He hadn't expected the question to land so softly. No, he said. That's all. All right. Take care of yourself, Carl. The line went dead. Carl stared at the phone for a moment longer than necessary. That night, Nate came over with beer and absolutely no emotional intelligence. So, Nate said, kicking off his shoes, you keeping the fondue set or setting it on fire? It was a gift from my aunt, Carl replied. I think that legally binds me to it. They ordered pizza, ate straight from the box, and watched a movie neither of them followed. Nate talked. Carl listened. It worked. The next morning, Carl went to the grocery store and bought things Mandy hated out of spite and self-discovery. Olives, spicy sausage, a cereal with an unsettling amount of fiber. He cooked dinner for himself that night. Overcooked the pasta. Didn't apologize to anyone. It was good. By Friday, the novelty wore thin and something else crept in. Not loneliness, exactly, but restlessness. Carl found himself standing in the doorway of rooms without knowing why, opening the fridge without being hungry, scrolling his phone with no destination. So when his email chimed with a message titled cancellation confirmation, he clicked it immediately. The email was concise, polite, and mercifully free of heart emojis. At the bottom, Evelyn had added a postscript. If you have questions later or need anything adjusted, feel free to reach out directly. Carl read it twice. Then he closed the laptop and went for a walk. He took routes he and Mandy never had. Past the park, she said, was fine but kind of boring. Down a side street with an old bookstore and a cafe he'd never noticed because she didn't like coffee unless it was sweet enough to qualify as dessert. The cafe window was fogged from the inside, chalk lettering promising scones worth the miss. Carl went in. It smelled like cinnamon and burned espresso. He ordered black coffee, surprised the barista by not elaborating, and turned to look for a seat. Carl, he looked up. Evelyn stood by the counter, coat slung over one arm, a takeaway cup in her hand. She was younger than he'd pictured, early 30s maybe, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she cataloged everything but judged very little. Hi, he said, genuinely startled. Evelyn. Small world, she said. Or medium-sized town. I didn't realize you lived around here. I don't, she replied. I just make excellent decisions about caffeine. He smiled before he thought about it. Apparently so. They stood there awkwardly for half a second. Well, Evelyn said, lifting her cup. I won't trap you in an accidental social interaction unless you want to be. Carl gestured to the empty chair at his table. You can sit, if you want. She studied his face, briefly, professionally, like she was checking for cracks, and then nodded. Okay. They talked. Not about weddings. Not about Mandy. They talked about the bookstore down the street, about bad signage, about how no one ever admitted they liked instrumental movie soundtracks until 3 drinks in. Evelyn laughed easily, leaned in when she listened. Carl found himself saying things without rehearsing them first. After 20 minutes, she glanced at her watch. I should go. Real job awaits, right? Carl said, oddly disappointed. She stood, slinging her coat back on. It was nice running into you, Carl. Yeah, he said. It was. She hesitated, then added, You're handling things well. Carl blinked. You don't know how I'm handling things. She smiled. I know how people usually sound when they cancel weddings. You sound intact. He considered that. I feel intact, I think. That counts, she said. See you around. Carl watched her leave, then stared at his coffee until it went cold. On the walk home, he realized something else. The space in his life wasn't empty. It was waiting, and for the first time since the night everything ended, Carl felt curious about what might fill it. Chapter 4. Accidental Company. Carl did not set out to keep running into Evelyn Harper. If anything, he did the opposite. He took different routes to work, switched grocery stores, and told himself, firmly, that he did not need to read into a pleasant conversation with a woman who happened to cancel his wedding paperwork without pity. Pleasant did not mean meaningful. Meaningful was dangerous. Meaningful came with expectations and color palettes. So when he opened the door to the hardware store on Saturday morning and nearly collided with her, he stared at the ceiling like it might explain itself. Well, Evelyn said, steadying a stack of paint samples against her chest. Either this town is much smaller than advertised, or you're following me. Carl blinked. I can assure you I'm not coordinated enough for stalking. She smiled at that, quick, crooked. Good. That would have been awkward. He gestured vaguely behind him. I live nearby. I work nearby, she said. On weekends, I pretend I'm a person with hobbies. What are your hobbies? Carl asked before his brain could intercept. Evelyn glanced down at the samples. Currently, repainting my kitchen because I told myself it would be fun. Carl nodded sympathetically. That's how it starts. They walked the aisles together, unplanned but easy. Evelyn debated between two nearly identical shades of blue while Carl examined a shelf of screws he didn't need. Do you know the difference between Misty Harbor and Coastal Whisper? She asked. No, Carl said. But I'm confident neither will whisper when the cabinets start peeling. She laughed. You're not wrong. He paid for his single pack of screws and held the door for her. Outside, the air was brisk, the sky undecided. So, Evelyn said, adjusting her coat, do you still drink your coffee black? Or was that a temporary identity? Carl considered. I think it's permanent now, like a tattoo I got emotionally. Bold, she said. Well, good luck with whatever that is. She nodded at his bag. Structural reinforcement, Carl replied. For my ego. They parted with a casual wave. Carl didn't think about it again until Monday, until his calendar reminder chimed. Finalize refunds. He groaned and opened his laptop. Emails stacked neatly, all from the same address. Evelyn Harper. He scrolled. Clear updates. Refund breakdowns. One note asking if he preferred checks or direct deposit. At the bottom of the last email, a single line. Also, for what it's worth, Coastal Whisper one. Carl stared at it. Then, against his better judgment, he typed back. I was rooting for Misty Harbor. This feels personal. The reply came 5 minutes later. I'll live with the guilt. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Their exchanges stayed light, infrequent. Nothing loaded. No confessions. Carl told himself it was harmless. Professional proximity, mild humor, nothing more. Then Nate invited him to a trivia night. Carl almost declined. He'd been declining a lot lately. Social invitations felt heavier now, like they required more effort than they once had. But Nate had the persistence of someone who'd known Carl long enough to ignore his protests. Come on, Nate said. You need humans. Plus, you're good at trivia. I'm good at geography and extremely bad at pop culture, Carl replied. That's why it's a team sport. So Carl went. The bar was loud, cramped, and smelled faintly of fried food and competitive desperation. Nate waved him over to a table already crowded with friends and acquaintances. Carl slid into an empty seat, scanning the room. Then he froze. Evelyn sat at the next table over, laughing with a group of people who looked far too confident. She caught his eye. Her smile shifted, from surprised to amused to unmistakably pleased. She raised her glass in a small salute. Carl exhaled. Of course. Nate followed his gaze. You know her? Define know, Carl said. Trivia began. Carl's team struggled through music questions and inexplicably lost a point arguing about the difference between a sequel and a reboot. Evelyn's team surged ahead with aggressive confidence. During the break, Evelyn wandered over. You look like you're having fun, she observed. Carl eyed her team's score. You look like you're cheating. We're efficient, she said. Big difference. Are you the ringer? I bring snacks, Evelyn replied. They keep me around. She glanced at Nate. Who's this? Nate, he said, offering a hand. Longtime friend. Amateur instigator. Evelyn shook his hand. Evelyn, professional organizer of chaos. That tracks, Nate said approvingly. The final round came down to a tie. The question. Which author wrote under the pen name George Eliot? Carl didn't hesitate. Mary and Evans. Evelyn's head snapped toward him. Their teams wrote the same answer. The buzzer sounded. Tiebreaker. A sudden death question flashed onto the screen. What year did the first modern Olympic Games take place? Carl and Evelyn locked eyes. 1896, Carl said. Evelyn grinned. You beat me by half a second. His team cheered. Evelyn clapped anyway. Afterward, they lingered near the bar, conversation folding easily around them. You're annoyingly good at this, Evelyn said. Carl shrugged. It's the only place my useless facts feel valued. She studied him for a moment. You don't strike me as someone who likes attention. I don't, he said. I like clarity. That explains a lot, she said softly. There it was again, that sense of being seen without being examined. They didn't exchange numbers that night. They didn't need to. A week later, Carl found himself at the bookstore again, flipping through a paperback he didn't intend to buy. Don't tell me, Evelyn said behind him. You're developing hobbies. He turned, smiling despite himself. I'm branching out. Careful, she warned. That's how lives get complicated. Too late for that. They talked in the aisle until the owner politely pretended not to watch them block traffic. They didn't talk about Mandy. They didn't talk about weddings. They talked about books, about terrible movie adaptations, about how adulthood felt like a series of accidental commitments. When Evelyn finally glanced at the clock, she sighed. I should go. Yeah, Carl said. Me too. They walked to the door together. Hey, Evelyn said, hesitating. If you ever want to grab coffee that doesn't happen by accident. Carl felt it, the moment where he might retreat. The familiar instinct to keep things safe, unexamined. Instead, he nodded. I'd like that. She smiled. Good. They parted ways, neither rushing. That night, Carl lay in bed staring at the ceiling, not because he was restless, but because his mind felt awake in a new way. He wasn't falling for her. Not yet. But he was learning something important. Connection didn't have to be loud to matter. And sometimes, the best company arrived when you weren't looking for it at all. Chapter 5. Carl noticed the change the way he noticed most things lately. Indirectly. It wasn't that anything dramatic happened between him and Evelyn. There were no sweeping declarations, no sudden kisses in the rain. What changed was smaller and therefore harder to ignore. He started anticipating her. Not obsessively, not desperately, just in the quiet spaces, in the pause between emails at work, in the half-second before he pushed open the cafe door, in the way he found himself thinking she'd like this about books or jokes or a bench in the park that got good afternoon light. That was new. They'd been seeing each other, casually, deliberately undefined, for a few weeks. Coffee that turned into walks. Walks that turned into dinners that were technically not dates. According to Evelyn, who said it with a smile that suggested she enjoyed watching Carl process the concept. Carl did not correct her. On a Wednesday evening that felt more like a Sunday, slow, overcast, heavy with the promise of rain, they sat across from each other in a small restaurant with uneven tables and a chalkboard menu that changed based on the owner's mood. Evelyn was telling a story about a corporate retreat that involved 3 alpacas and one extremely misjudged trust exercise. So anyway, she said, gesturing with her fork, that's how I learned that liability waivers are only comforting in theory. Carl laughed, then stopped himself, surprised by how easily it came. He hadn't laughed like that in a while. Not the polite social version. The unguarded one. Evelyn noticed. You do that more now, she said. Do what? That, she replied. The real laugh. It's different. Carl shifted slightly in his chair. You've been observing? I'm an event planner, she said. It's basically my whole thing. He smiled, but something tightened just behind his ribs. Being seen still felt like standing too close to the edge of something. They finished dinner without rushing. Outside, the rain finally started, light, patient. Evelyn tucked her hands into her coat pockets. Walk. Carl nodded. Sure. They moved side by side, not touching, the streetlights blurring softly on the pavement. The moment felt balanced on something fragile. Carl could feel it, an unspoken question hovering between them. So, Evelyn said eventually, how are you really? He considered deflecting, then didn't. I'm good, he said. And that scares me a little. She glanced at him but didn't interrupt. I thought I'd feel broken longer, Carl continued, or angry, or desperate to prove I was fine. But mostly I just feel clear. That's not a bad thing. No, he agreed. But clarity makes you responsible. For what? For choosing again. They stopped walking without deciding to. The rain whispered around them. Evelyn studied his face, her expression open but not expectant. You don't owe anyone a schedule, she said gently. Including me. I know, Carl replied. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He exhaled. It's me realizing I'm closer to something than I expected to be. She smiled faintly. And I don't want to rush it, he said. Or mess it up. Evelyn nodded slowly. That's fair. There was no disappointment in her voice. No pressure. Just acceptance. It should have made him feel better. Instead, it made him acutely aware of how much he wanted her to be disappointed. They parted with a brief hug that lingered a fraction too long. Carl walked home with rain dampening his jacket and his thoughts tangled in equal measure. The next day, Mandy called. Carl stared at his phone until it stopped ringing. Then she texted, "Can we talk?" He didn't answer right away. He sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, and waited to see what emotion surfaced first. It wasn't longing. It wasn't anger. It was fatigue. Still, he agreed to meet her. Neutral territory. Coffee shop. Afternoon. Mandy arrived precisely on time, looking polished and successful and exactly as she always had when she was certain she was right. She smiled when she saw him, tentative but hopeful. "You look good," she said. "So do you," Carl replied honestly. They ordered coffee. Saturday. "I didn't handle things well," Mandy began. "I was overwhelmed, and I didn't realize how far I'd drifted." Carl nodded. He believed her. "I miss you," she said. "I miss us." He let the words settle. "Mandy," he said carefully, "I don't miss who I was with you." Her brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means I was always adjusting myself," he said. "Waiting, excusing, making room. I don't think you meant for that to happen, but it did. I was building something," she insisted. "For us." "I know," Carl said. "But you were building it alone." Silence stretched. She studied him, searching. "Is there someone else?" Carl didn't hesitate. "There's someone new in my life." "Yes." Mandy's lips pressed together. "Already?" "Not like that," he said. "But enough to know I don't want to go backward." She sat back, absorbing that. "You're different." "I am," Carl agreed. "So are you." They finished their coffee politely. There were no raised voices, no tears, just the quiet acknowledgement of an ending that had already happened. When Carl left, he felt lighter than he'd expected. But that night, lying in bed, he found himself thinking of Evelyn, of her patience, her steadiness, the way she didn't ask him to be more than he was. And that scared him more than Mandy ever had. Because this time, the risk wasn't losing himself. It was choosing to show himself fully, and trusting someone else to meet him there. Carl turned onto his side, staring at the dark. The almosts were the hardest part, because they asked the most honest question of all. What if this time it actually works? Chapter 6, Choosing the Risk. Carl decided to stop being careful on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. Not with a speech prepared or a moment engineered for emotional resonance. He decided while standing in line at the post office, holding a padded envelope he'd meant to mail 3 days earlier, listening to the man in front of him argue with a clerk about whether stamps could, in fact, expire. The thought arrived fully formed and inconveniently calm. If I keep waiting to feel ready, I'll miss the point entirely. Carl shifted his weight, glanced at his phone, and before he could overthink it, opened a new message. "Are you free tonight?" Not accidentally. On purpose. He stared at the screen, heart picking up speed now that his brain had finally caught up. The reply came less than a minute later. "That depends," Evelyn wrote. "Is this a trick question?" Carl smiled despite himself. "No tricks. Just honesty." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. "Then yes," she replied. "I'm free." He exhaled, slow and grounding, like he just stepped off something high and discovered he could land. They met at the bookstore cafe, not because it was romantic but because it was familiar. Neutral ground. No expectations built into the walls. Evelyn arrived first, already seated, coat draped over the back of her chair, hands wrapped around a mug. She looked up when Carl approached, her expression open but curious. "You look like a man with an agenda," she said. Carl sat. "I do. Should I be alarmed?" "Only mildly." She laughed, then tilted her head. "Okay, what's up?" Carl took a breath. He didn't rush it. He didn't stall either. "I like you," he said. "Not in the vague, drifting way I've been pretending this is. I like you enough to want to be clear about it." Evelyn didn't interrupt. She watched him closely, not guarded, just attentive. "I'm not asking for guarantees," Carl continued, "or timelines. I'm just asking if you'd like to go on an actual date with me. One where we both know what it is." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, studying him like he'd just handed her something delicate. "Thank you for saying it that way," she said finally. "That's not a no," Carl said, more statement than question. "No," she agreed. "It's not." She smiled soft, genuine. "I'd like that." Relief washed through him, followed immediately by something brighter. Lighter. "Good," he said. "Because I already have an idea." "Oh, dinner. Somewhere with real chairs and a menu that doesn't involve chalk." "Bold," she teased. "I accept." They settled on Friday. Not too soon. Not too far away. Just intentional. Carl's friends noticed the difference immediately. Nate squinted at him over lunch the next day. "You're smiling like someone who just solved a problem instead of avoiding it." "I solved a problem," Carl said. "By not avoiding it." Nate blinked. "Who are you and what have you done with my friend?" Carl shrugged. "I'm evolving." "That's deeply unsettling," Nate said. "I'll alert the authorities." Carl didn't even mind. At home, the house felt different again, but not emptier or fuller. just aligned. Like furniture rearranged for how he actually lived now, not how he'd planned to. He cleaned. He cooked something moderately ambitious. He didn't check his phone every 5 minutes, but he also didn't pretend he wasn't looking forward to Friday. That felt like progress. The date itself was easy in the way that only honest things were. Dinner was warm and unpretentious. They talked about work, not in detail but in texture. Evelyn told him about the quiet satisfaction of fixing problems before anyone noticed them. Carl admitted he liked systems because they made sense when people didn't. So you're a preemptive thinker, Evelyn said. You plan for collapse. I plan for stability, Carl corrected. Collapse just tends to ignore plans. She smiled at that. You know, most people would have rushed this. Carl considered. Most people aren't me. And that's not an apology, she noted. No, he said. It's a fact. They walked afterward, the night cool and steady around them. At her car, they paused, not awkwardly, but with awareness. Evelyn met his gaze. This feels good, she said. It does, Carl agreed. She leaned in first. The kiss was unhurried, gentle, unclaimed by expectation. When they parted, both smiled like they'd confirmed something important. I'll see you soon, she said. I hope so, Carl replied. He meant it. The test came sooner than he expected. 2 days later, Mandy emailed him. Not a call, not a text, an email formal, measured, unmistakably professional. I've been offered a position in Chicago. I wanted to let you know before you heard it elsewhere. Carl stared at the screen. He hadn't expected to feel much. He was wrong. The sensation wasn't jealousy or regret. It was disorientation, the brief vertigo of realizing a parallel life was continuing somewhere else, unchanged by his exit. He closed the laptop and sat with it. That evening, Evelyn called. You're quiet, she said after he answered. I am, Carl admitted. Do you want to talk about it? Yes, he said, then paused. I think. They met at his place this time. Carl made tea. Evelyn curled her feet beneath her on the couch like she'd done it before, which unsettled him in a good way. He told her about Mandy, about the email, about Chicago. Evelyn listened without interruption. How do you feel? She asked when he finished. Carl searched himself carefully. Resolved, he said, and surprised by that. She nodded. That makes sense. He looked at her. I don't want you to think I'm carrying unfinished business. I don't, Evelyn said simply. I think you're carrying experience. That distinction loosened something in him. He reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. I don't know exactly where this is going, Carl said. But I know I don't want to keep hedging my life. Evelyn squeezed his fingers. Then don't. He smiled. A quiet, grounded thing. Choosing the risk didn't feel reckless anymore. Felt honest. And for the first time since the night everything ended, Carl wasn't imagining the future as something to protect himself from. He was imagining it as something to step into, open-eyed, steady, and finally, willingly. Chapter 7. When things go wrong differently, the misunderstanding arrived the way most of them did, quietly, disguised as nothing. Carl found out by accident. He was at the cafe, killing time before meeting Evelyn for dinner, when his phone buzzed with a text from Nate. Didn't know you were back on the event circuit. Carl frowned. What circuit? He typed. A moment later, a photo arrived. It showed Evelyn standing in a warmly lit hall, clipboard in hand, smiling at a man in a tailored suit. The banner behind them read, Lakeshore Foundation Autumn Gala. Carl stared at it longer than he should have. The first reaction surprised him. Not anger, not jealousy, but something older and more insidious. Withdrawal. The instinct to step back before he'd stepped too far in. The reflex to protect himself by assuming he'd misunderstood the situation already. He locked his phone and finished his coffee, the taste suddenly flat. Evelyn arrived 10 minutes later, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes bright. Sorry, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Traffic was a nightmare. No worries, Carl replied. He sounded normal. That worried him more than if he hadn't. They ordered. Talked about nothing, about a movie she'd seen, about a work deadline he'd met. It all flowed, technically. But there was a thinness to it Carl couldn't ignore, like he was watching himself from a step back. Evelyn noticed. You're quiet, she said, echoing herself from weeks ago. Carl hesitated. The old version of him would have smiled, waved it off, stored the discomfort for later, for never. Instead, he took a breath. I saw a picture of you today, he said. She stilled, not alarmed, just attentive. Okay. You were at a gala. With someone. It caught me off guard. Evelyn's brows knit slightly. Which picture? Nate sent it, Carl said. I didn't know you were working events like that again. She nodded slowly. I never stopped. Oh, Carl said. The word felt small. She leaned back, studying him. Not defensively, but carefully. Is that what this is about? I think, Carl said, choosing honesty over polish. I made an assumption and then didn't ask you about it, which is apparently my old pattern trying to sneak back in. Evelyn smiled faintly. I appreciate you catching it. He met her gaze. Can you help me understand? Of course, she said. That was a client event. The man in the photo is their director. Married. Deeply boring. But very punctual. Carl felt a quiet wave of embarrassment wash through him. I didn't think that I was dating someone else, she asked gently. Yes. Evelyn nodded. Fair fear. But no. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. Can I ask you something? Please. When you saw the picture, did you think I'd done something wrong? Carl considered it carefully. No, he said. I think I thought I had missed something. Her expression softened. That's different. It is, he agreed. And I don't want to punish you for it by pulling away. Evelyn smiled then, fully openly. Good. Because that would have annoyed me. He laughed, tension finally breaking. I figured. They finished dinner with ease restored, conversation warmer for the honesty that had cleared the air. Outside, the night was crisp, the streetlights steady. I'm glad you said something, Evelyn said as they walked. A lot of people don't. I'm trying not to be a lot of people anymore, Carl replied. She bumped his shoulder lightly. You're doing okay. They stopped at her car. The moment felt familiar now. Not fragile, but grounded. I'm still learning, Carl said. How to speak up without assuming the worst. That's kind of the whole deal, Evelyn said. You don't avoid misunderstandings by never getting close. You avoid them by talking. He nodded. I like this version better. Me too. She kissed him, quick, affectionate, certain. As she drove away, Carl stood for a moment, hands in his pockets, letting the feeling settle. Things hadn't gone wrong. They'd gone differently, and for the first time that didn't feel like a warning sign. It felt like proof he was doing something right. Chapter 8, Autumn rewritten. Autumn arrived the way Carl liked things now, clearly. The air sharpened overnight, leaves turning without ceremony. The city settling into that brief, perfect balance between warmth and restraint. Carl noticed it on his walk to work, the way the light slanted differently through the trees, the way people moved a little faster, as if the season had reminded them that time was, in fact, happening. He liked that reminder. It had been 3 months since the night he canceled his engagement. Long enough for the shock to fade, for explanations to become unnecessary, for his life to feel less like a reaction and more like a direction. Evelyn noticed it too. You walk like someone who knows where he's going now, she said one morning, matching his stride as they crossed the street together. Carl glanced at her. I used to think that meant having a plan. And now I think it means choosing the next step on purpose. She smiled. That's dangerously functional. They'd fallen into a rhythm. Not seamless, but intentional. Weekends were shared but not assumed. Evenings were planned but flexible. They talked when something felt off. They laughed when it didn't. It wasn't perfect. It was better. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, Carl found himself standing in front of the same venue where his engagement party had once been planned. The sign out front read, Autumn Community Fundraiser. Welcome. He paused, hands in his coat pockets, feeling the echo of that night flicker briefly through him. Not pain, just memory. You okay? Evelyn stood beside him, clipboard tucked under her arm, eyes searching his face. Yeah, Carl said honestly, just noticing the symmetry. She followed his gaze, then nodded. You don't have to come in if it feels weird. I want to, he said. It doesn't feel weird. It feels finished. That was the truth. Inside, the space buzzed with quiet energy. Volunteers adjusted centerpieces. A string quartet tuned in the corner. The room smelled like apples and polished wood. Carl moved easily among people now, helping where needed, laughing when someone spilled cider on a raffle table. He didn't feel like a guest in his own life anymore. Evelyn watched him from across the room, a small smile tugging at her mouth. Later, when things settled and the event flowed on its own momentum, they found a quiet corner near the windows. Outside, the leaves swirled in lazy spirals. You're good at this, Carl said, nodding toward the room. Evelyn shrugged. Organizing things is easy. Organizing people is chaos. I just try to make the chaos useful. He smiled. You make it look effortless. She studied him for a moment. You know, you don't flinch anymore. At what? At moments like this, she said. Places tied to old plans. You're present. Carl considered that. I think I stopped measuring everything against what it was supposed to be, and started measuring it against what it is? Yes. She reached for his hand without ceremony. He laced his fingers through hers just as easily. Later, as the fundraiser wound down, Carl stepped outside alone for a moment, letting the cool air ground him. He thought, not for the first time, about the wedding that would have been planned by now, the invitations that would have gone out, the life he'd imagined because it seemed like the logical next chapter. He didn't resent it. He felt grateful he'd listened when something inside him had gone quiet enough to be heard. Evelyn joined him, handing him a paper cup of cider. Penny for your thoughts, she said. Carl took a sip, then smiled. I was just thinking that I used to believe happiness was something you built once and then defended. And now I think it's something you practice, he said. With the right person. Over time. She leaned into his side, shoulder warm against his arm. That sounds like a man who's learned something. Pain is an excellent teacher, Carl replied. But so is peace. They stood there, watching the last guests filter out, the venue returning to its neutral, expectant quiet. As they walked to their cars, Evelyn slowed, then stopped. Hey, she said. Carl turned. Hey, she took a breath, not nervous, but thoughtful. I don't need you to say anything back to this right now, but I want you to know, I'm not drifting here. He met her gaze steadily. Neither am I. She nodded, satisfied. Good. They kissed, soft, certain, unhurried. No audience. No symbolism required. When Carl got home that night, he didn't turn on the lights right away. He stood in the doorway, taking in the familiar shape of his life, the furniture arranged for how he lived now, the quiet hum of a place that felt fully his. He thought of the man he'd been months ago, standing in a crowded room, choosing to end something publicly because it could no longer survive privately. That man had been afraid. This one wasn't fearless, but he was honest. Carl hung his coat, set his keys down, and smiled to himself. Autumn had once marked the season his life was supposed to begin. Instead, it marked the season he learned how to choose it. And that, he realized, was better than any plan he'd ever made.